Hey guys, it's Courtney with BDS, and right here we have a 2020 Ford F250 Tremor, which is Ford's off-road version of their HT trucks. And today we're going to show you how to install our 2.5-inch coilover conversion system. So after you've removed the wheels and tires, you're going to use a 24mm socket to remove the track bar nut on the axle side. Next up, you're going to grab a 30mm wrench and socket. You're going to remove the bolt and then go ahead and take the track bar out of the truck. The next step is to remove the 3 clips holding the vacuum line in place so that we can get more slack. Next up, you're going to grab your 10mm socket to remove the brake line bracket from the coil spring seat. Next up, you're going to grab your 13mm socket to remove the brake line bracket from the frame. The next step is to remove the brake line bracket completely. So we're going to use a pair of channel locks to remove the brake line retaining clip. Take it off. The brake line from there is going to swing down. You're going to make a small cut. We're going to completely dispose of it. Next step is to make sure that your axle is supported with your jack stands, because we're going to remove some shocks. You're going to use an 18mm socket on the bottom and a 21mm wrench on top. You might have to use a vice grip to keep the shock from spinning. Go ahead and grab your 15mm socket, because we're going to remove the 4 nuts that are holding the sway bar to the frame. Next, we're going to lower the axle so that we can remove the spring.
Yep.
Next step is to go ahead and remove the bump stop. Easiest way to do that is to grab a mallet and just give it a good hit. The next step is to remove the bump stop cup with a 10mm socket. The next step is to grab a sawzall to cut off the coil spring centering tube. You'll want to make sure that your cut is flush with the mounting surface and that you deburr any sharp edges. After that, you'll want to use some black spray paint to cover up any exposed metal. So the next step is to disconnect your cable tie bracket, and then you're going to want to bend it upwards in order to make room for the center portion of the coilover mount. The next step in this process is to grab your 13mm socket to unbolt the 3 bolts that are connecting your ABS module to your upper coil bucket. Next, you're going to use your 18mm socket to remove the lower coil seat from the axle. The next step is to take your upper coilover mount and place it into the coil bucket so that your reservoir mount is parallel with the frame. Next, you're going to mark your 3 holes so that you can drill. You'll notice that the shocks are still in place, but that's just because we are doing a few other measurements. Normally, you would have the axle still supported by your jack stands. The next step is to install your bump stop extension. You use the provided bolt and a 13mm socket to install. We're now going to install the brake line relocation brackets. Now these are side specific, so you want to make sure you grab the right one. We're going to be working on the driver's side, which is the one that is bent outwards. First, you'll want to hold the relocation bracket up to the frame and line it up with the pinhole to get an idea of where that brake line will be reformed. Once you form the brake line, you'll slide the relocation bracket onto the line. From there, you'll use the original hardware to install the brake line bracket to the frame. From there, you'll use a 7/16 wrench and socket to secure the cable clamp, which will secure the ABS line to the brake line bracket. Using a 22mm socket, we're going to install the lower coilover mount using the provided 14mm hardware. Now that we've installed the lower coilover mount, it's time to install the upper. So you're going to use the provided 1/2" hardware with a 5/8 socket and 11/16 wrench. So now for the fun part, we get to install the coilover into the upper mount. You're going to use the 1/2" hardware with a 3/4 wrench and socket. Coilovers are side specific and they will be marked with a sticker marked left or right. You may need to use a vice grip or a set of channel locks to compress the bushing to fit into the mount. Now that the coilover is installed, it's time to mount the reservoir. You're going to twist the hose and mount the reservoir against the mounting bracket. You'll use a 8mm socket to secure the provided hose clamps on either side. Next step is to remove the OE radius arms. This is something that you will have to do one side at a time. The tools required are a 24mm wrench and socket as well as a 27mm wrench. When installing the BDS radius arm, you'll start with the bottom bolt. You'll have the cam plate included. One thing to note is that you will want the hole on the cam plate facing towards the rear of the truck. Next, you're going to swing the radius arm up into the factory frame bracket and install the bolt. In order to install the last bolt on the radius arm, you may have to loosen or remove one of the bolts from the other radius arm to allow the axle to move. We're now going to install the sway bar drop bracket. These are side specific, so make sure you have the right one. You'll use the factory hardware to install it to the frame. Now that the bracket is installed, you can now connect your sway bar using the new hardware in a 9/16 wrench and socket. Now we're going to install our optional Fox 2.0 shocks. Before we do that, we need to insert the bushing and sleeve into the hole. You're going to use some sort of lubricant. You can use an arbor press, a hammer, just tap it in yourself. To assemble the top of the shock into the vehicle, you'll start with your curved washer facing upwards. You'll layer it with your rubber bushing, also facing upwards, and then insert it into the upper shock mount. Then you're going to mirror it on the other side, and then use your nut to secure it all together. Then you'll grab your 18mm socket and your original hardware to attach the bottom of the shock to the axle. The next thing we're going to do is install our heavy-duty adjustable track bar. To get started, you need to insert your grease zerk and then lubricate and press in your bushing and sleeve. The next thing you want to do is adjust your track bar to be a 1/4 inch longer than the stock track bar. In order to do this, you'll need some pressure on the bar itself to keep it from spinning as you are twisting to make an adjustment. You might need a friend or a clamp or something to help you do this. For your measurements, you'll want to take a measurement from the center of your ball joint to the center of your sleeve, or center the grease zerk, whatever works for you. So once you have your measurements, you're going to take these bolts and one by one you're going to pull them out, Loctite it, and then reinsert. Once the adjustable track bar is installed into the frame side bracket, you're going to go ahead and use the OE hardware to secure it into place, but make sure you leave it loose. We're not going to tighten it up until we have the truck back on the ground. The next step is to reinstall the brake line bracket into the lower coilover mount. You use the provided 1/4 inch hardware with a 7/16 wrench and socket. Moving on to the rear. First, we're going to start by taking out the shocks. You're going to need a 18mm socket and a 21mm wrench. For the next step, we're going to work on one side at a time. We're going to start by removing the U-bolts using a 24mm socket. The next step is to pull the pin out of the leaf pack. In order to do this, we grab some C-clamps to hold everything into place, a 15mm socket in order to get the nut off, and then we pull the pin out. Once the old pin is out, you're going to install the new pin along with the 1-inch bolt-on block. The next step is to reinstall the factory block. From there, you'll want to make sure that that centering pin realigns with the block. Next, we're going to install our Fox 2.0 shocks. For this, you're going to need an 18mm socket and a 21mm wrench. Next up, we're going to put on the wheels and tires. From there, you're going to attach the track bar to the axle mount. We're going to torque it and then torque the radius arm pivot bolt. Once everything is torqued, you'll want to make sure that the axle is centered underneath the truck, and if it's not, you'll want to adjust your track bar. And don't forget to attach the ABS module to the upper coil bucket. Well guys, it was fun hanging out with you. We hope this install video was a great guide to helping you with the process. If you have any further questions, feel free to reach out on social media, call us, email our tech department. We're here to help.